Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Roundtable at the Texas 811 Damage Prevention Summit. And welcome to all of those watching us on the stream. So my name is Jeremy Wang. I'm with BizMetrics, and I'd like to take a quick opportunity for the panelists to introduce themselves. Jeremy, let's start with you.
My name is Jeremy Moore. I work for USIC. I'm responsible for operations over Texas, New Mexico, and hold the regional director title.
My name is Steve Johnston. I'm with Doley Construction out of Pennsylvania. We're ditch diggers.
Chris Thompson with Ditch Witch, product manager over vacuum excavation.
Scott Landis, President of Infrastructure Resources, and our mission is saving lives through education, and so we produce the Global Excavation Safety Conference and the DP Pro magazine and Excavation Safety Guide. So we're professional listeners, not doers like you guys.
Great, thank you. So the format's going to be pretty informal. I'm going to read the question, and then the four roundtable panelists will discuss, and I might follow up with other questions, and hopefully there's going to be a lot of interaction here. And then at the end, we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A from our fine audience here, probably last 5-10 minutes. So the question for this first roundtable is, beyond more haphazard phone calls and texts, how can communication between excavators and locators really be improved? So does someone want to start here? If not, Jeremy?
So, pretty complicated situation. We, as a speaking for a locating group, we handle lots of work on a daily basis. Most tickets don't require a whole lot of communication between the excavator and the locator, but we're seeing that shift with a lot of the project work that we're seeing coming through over the last several years, where the majority of our work has began to move to the project side, and so that's where communications become very important to us. What I see here locally, here in Texas, is there's really no specific recommendation or requirement for the excavator to communicate with the locate group. Most of the larger excavators do a good job of that, but we do see some work that comes across that we have a very difficult time getting in touch with the excavator. So, in my opinion, I think moving to a ticket type that would require some communication from the excavator and the locate company, like a wide area locate or a long scope ticket that would require a meet in advance prior to the larger scope work being done would be beneficial for both parties.
So I come from Pennsylvania, obviously, and part of our one-call law, it requires that. We require a complex project meeting for anything that's over 2,000 feet and locate or goes beyond a one-block radius, or if anyone really deems it complex, you can, request those types of meetings through our portal. To be perfectly honest, it's not as useful as it sounds. You get a lot of people that utilize that portal and that system very little. And the communication that I see is harder because it's more on a company size level, meaning that we get the phone numbers for, the customer service company, for the utility company, instead of the locator's phone number. And there's no way, and obviously we know locators, change by the day. One day it might be, one gentleman, the next day it could be somebody else. So even if you do make contact with that person and obtain a phone number to communicate with them, that changes, and then, they say the territory changes or something. So the portal works, but one of its also shortcomings is it creates a situation where now you have people out in the field that are relying on the internet to get onto a portal to try and check those things, which, obviously has its own, challenges as well, so.
Do you guys find, I know in theory, at least on smaller jobs, white lining, whether virtual or real white paint, hopefully is designed to, I guess, replace a little bit of the communication on that small stuff? Does that really get used? Do you find it really useful from an excavator or a locator standpoint?
I would say more times than not, we do not see the white paint on the side.
Would it be a help if you
It
did?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need delineation of the work area, white lining, staking, GPS coordinates from that perspective is always beneficial. But when we have these larger scope tickets, there's a lot involved there. So, and specifically here in Texas, a routine ticket, whatever ticket's called in, aside from an emergency or those types of excavations, a ticket's a ticket, right? It's a routine type ticket. There's no designation of whether it's a long scope ticket or a short scope ticket.
So with that portal too, I mean, you're still calling in the tickets generally the same way. You're still taking the big area and kind of chopping it into phases or streets or however the project's, agreed to be located out. The white paint is very useful, I find. I mean, as I'm able to paint lines like we're going down this street, mark all the laterals, mark this, mark that. You can kind of put it in the notes or whatever. And then, like I said, I mean, we require, at least in our company, to put whoever's calling that ticket in, whoever's running that project, either the foreman or superintendent's cell phone numbers on there. So anybody has a problem, like they're not calling our office and then going through those steps to get to it. They're going right to the horse's mouth there and trying to figure out what needs to be done, in real time, which is helpful. I mean, the communication needs to be helpful, or needs to be, utilized better, but at the same time, there's not much better than picking up a phone and having a conversation, addressing questions in real time that way, so.
So in Pennsylvania, where they have that requirement for the meet ahead of time, do you find that typically the person who's coming from the locator side that does the meet is also the person who ends up doing the locating?
No, generally, no.
And so would that be helpful?
That would be very helpful, but from a logistics standpoint, a
Yeah,
locator's got so many tickets, he's usually trying to, take care of that to peel him off for an hour to go to a meeting. You'd be able to speak better to that, but I would imagine it's logistically a problem.
Yeah, so obviously we don't have that here in Texas, but in some of the other areas it works very well. Typically a technician is assigned a specific route that will change based on the amount of workload that comes in that general area, but generally speaking, that should be the individual that you would deal with depending on the duration of the job, barring time off, PTO, things like that. But generally speaking, in my opinion, it would work better if you had kind of that same point of contact, A to B, through the duration of the job.
And to see if there's callbacks, right?
Right.
And typically in Texas, do you guys see the person who's located who goes out on a callback, or how do you guys usually handle that?
Generally, it depends on the amount of callbacks we have. So when I hear callback, I'm hearing an update to that original ticket.
Right.
Right. So we see updates come in that may come in 2 or 3 times, and we see updates that'll come in for a very extended amount of time, which begs the question of why are we calling a ticket that large if the ticket's going to remain recalled for that duration, right? Where the work's not being done in a 10 to 14 day period is my point. But I think to your point, having the point of contact be the individual on that job site, being the foreman, when we have that interaction, communication, things typically work pretty well. It's when whether that's on our end or the excavator's end, someone moves to the next job and we have a new foreman to deal with, that's where that communication can get broken down pretty quickly.
Right. I mean, from a manufacturer standpoint, we don't, we see both sides, and it's understandable that, you'd like to have someone to talk to, the same person every time. Logistically, that can be challenging. And callback, when I talk about callbacks also, just, like, okay, this is where it was marked, but I've done my pothole in, or I've done my soft excavation, I can't find it, and so that would be another form of callback. But I could see where it'd be useful to just have some kind of if you could do that, but I understand logistically that's almost a nightmare because you have people turnover and people have to take days off, and maybe it rains and so the job doesn't start on the day they thought it was going to start, and that starts becoming difficult to do. But the idea of a pre-meet and trying to have at least, like an A and a B on that and continuing forward, I think would help communication for sure. You don't want to call into a call center and get someone who doesn't know what's going on when you could call the guy who was out on the job site with you 3 days ago.
So Steve, I want to follow up on something you said. the portal that you used before, you've used in another state is not that, is quote unquote not that great. But is it that specific portal that can use improvements, or is it the idea of the portal? Because you also said the phone call is the most effective, but when we order something from Amazon or whatever, I mean, none of us want to receive a phone call about where the package is, right? Give me an update if I want in the app or something. So is it the portal can use some improvements, or you just don't want to use the portal at all?
Well, I would say it's a little bit of both. People don't utilize the portal to its maximum capacity, as well as you got guys out in the field trying to get work done, or locators out in the field trying to get locates done. For them to stop what they're doing to go back into their truck to fire up whatever hotspot they have, to fire up the portal to get onto that, it's just time consuming. It just adds time to the day when all of us could use a little more time in the day. So it's like I said, it's a useful tool because it gets everyone kind of on the same page up front. Again, it's how you use it. We find that a lot of the utility companies don't show up to those meetings, and then that wears a contractor down to say, like, all right, well, why am I driving to the job site to meet somebody? This is the 5th one in a row that nobody showed up to. Yeah. So that beats you down too. So I would say it's a little bit of both, but ultimately, to say that a locator trying to get marks on the ground to figure out where utilities are, or an excavator trying to figure something out, comparing that to an Amazon package delivery is a little different. Like, nobody's going to die if their toothpaste doesn't show up till tomorrow. So it's a little bit different that way. But like I said, I mean, I always found that a phone call is the most effective way of communication. But it's just a matter of being able to communicate with the correct person who knows what's going on. And that's, to me, is the most challenging part.
I mean, it sounds like a really good theory. Obviously, an opportunity to get everybody together and meet is great, but I also assume it doesn't extend the amount of time to execute the locate, right, by doing that?
It actually does in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So this meeting, we generally have a 3-day window for any normal ticket. And again, I'm not sure what each state has, but the complex project actually gives them a 10-day window to start, which gives everyone a little bit of time to get their ducks in a row. Hey, I have some questions about where you're starting, or hey, we have a lot of this area, we don't know where our stuff is, so it'd be nice to know when you're going to be there. You're not going to be there for 2 months. Well, we'll send our soft dig truck there to see if we can help locate some of these things ahead of time. So it does kind of trigger that. And like I said, it has its pluses and minuses, but its big plus is the theory. Let's bring everybody together. Let's put everybody on the same page. It allows you to, if you wanted to, you can add attachments to it. So if you want to throw a map of what you're doing or where you're working, or anything that's helpful or useful like that, a sign-in sheet so everyone has each other's contact information gets thrown on there. So some of the stuff's very useful as far as organizing the project that way, but again, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. If nobody's coming to the meetings and nobody's using the portal, then it's not as useful as it should be.
But so some of it sounds like the features you were talking about address a lot of the concerns that you all have been talking about, which is the locator who goes to the meet might not be the one who's locating, or the locator who started to locate on this complex project might be gone next week on vacation or in another area. And it seems like the features that you mentioned address those. So, I mean, again, ignoring the specific portal, but wouldn't the well-executed portal that coordinates all of these different stakeholders be helpful for these complex projects on the net, right, if people use it?
I think there has to be accountability involved, right? Both from the locating perspective and the excavating perspective. To your point, I think it seems like a good setup and philosophy, but if it's not being managed and there's no accountability within the stakeholder group, then to your point, it's a great motto, but if it's not effective, right? So I think there needs to be some accountability. You got to make the meets, right? And if you can't determine a mutually agreed upon time to meet at a different location or different date, then that's where that interaction comes in play. But I think I understand what Jimmy's saying about, hey, if you can track a package from A to B, you know when it's left the terminal, you know when it's hit the truck. I mean, that's great, but there has to be accountability in there amongst the individuals that are involved. And you know, I'm speaking from a Texas standpoint. I think that we have an opportunity there.
It's interesting, I note, you know, kind of being in the middle and just hearing all the sides, that so many things, like Jeremy said, this sounds like it answers all the problems, and it seems like one of the biggest problems we have is kind of empathy or education, so that all contractors, now you understand what the locator is going through and the engineer and all that, but too many people really can't, I think, put themselves in the shoes of the other person, or they probably wouldn't miss a meet and things like that. And so it just seems, as an industry, we just need to find a way to get everybody understanding all of the rules and how they're all interdependent. And most of the time when people get it, they're a lot more cooperative, at least I've seen.
It sounds like exploring white lining a little bit more as a requirement might be helpful also, because what we're talking about is communication. And so there's other forms of communication besides just talking on the phone or sending a text. If what they're really trying to communicate is, hey, here's where we're going to be on this job, what are the obstacles on this job, and you could identify that by some form of white lining, then maybe that would help reduce the need for an actual phone communication or a text communication.
Correct. And all these things kind of address the upfront side of the communication, but what they fail to do would be, you know, the real time, the locator's out there and he's got an issue, he's confused, or he can't get a locate. The wire's broken, he can't trace the line, so he wants to let somebody know, like, hey, this line's not located. Like, don't, make sure you're careful in here, or don't start till Monday or something where we can get in here. Or from an excavator's perspective, like, hey, I see gas meters on this house. There's no gas marks. What's going on out here? You know, I got a bucket in the ground right now. Do I need to stop my guys? You know, and if you're in a portal and it's just pinging somebody's phone, like, how many times does everybody's phone go off? Like, when you're busy, you just ignore it. It becomes white noise. So you need that accountability as far as the real-time answers. Being able to communicate in that real-time scenario is what's helpful to both sides. You know, that doesn't cause a locator who's confused on how he needs to locate it to have to leave and then come back and do it a second time or fix it a second time. And same thing for an excavator. You know, we would rather show up and have everything located so that we can start our work. And if we weren't clear in the way that we called our ticket in or how we marked it out in the field or any of those things to help the locator out, then that presents an issue from our angle. So it's a tough thing. But the one part of the communication we're not talking about is what happens, you know, when something's found in the field that needs to be communicated back to the utility company. So for instance, we're digging and we find, I've had this happen on a project, we're digging and we find an 8-inch gas main that's 8 feet off the mark. They marked an abandoned gas line instead of the live gas line. Now, luckily, our guys found it, didn't hit it. Our pipe layer was in the trench. He saw the trench, you know, something was up, stopped him, hand dug a little, found it. You know, and there's got to be a way, and it's not talking to USIC or the locating company about it, but it's how to update the maps or how to get, like, hey, everybody thought this was here, but it's really over here. So that way the next person that goes in there gets that right. You know, and those back-end communications to me are just as important. And there's nothing in Pennsylvania that allows for us to, short of, you know, calling up the utility company and trying to get a hold of, you know, whoever the czar of maps is and, you know, but we're not going to spend days and years trying to figure that out. So that back-end communication is something that gets lost in all this that I think from a safety perspective is probably just as important.
So based on what you're describing, I'm assuming the answer is no, but there's not anywhere on that portal to put in, hey, these are the complications we came across on this job, and then capture that and have that somehow tied to that area. So if there's a job called in on that, again, it triggers it and everyone can say, hey, the last company that was out here working, they had these challenges.
Nah, it's not that sophisticated. There's a notes section. I guess you could throw it in there, but if you know, Dolly Construction goes in there and then Smith Construction goes in there, they're separate portals. Smith Construction can't see that portal. That portal's specific to that particular job. So
So Steve, following up on that idea, which I think is a great idea, that can be added as a feature in a portal, right? Which is you can have a checkbox that says anomalies, I'm making this up, anomalies found in field, right? And then for which utility, and then maybe one line description, right? And then maybe that can automatically go back to that utility, right? And so the point is, the portal can, I mean, it's imperfect right now, but I've said this before, right? Perfect is enemy of the good, right? It can be used as a conduit, as not just a hub for all the stakeholders in the field, but as a conduit back to the plant owner.
Yeah, in theory, you could make it whatever you wanted to make it. The problem is, just from our perspective dealing with it in Pennsylvania, is once that portal's set up, the utility companies separate themselves. I deal with the locators. So the utility companies separate themselves. There's nobody at the gas company that's checking the portal for anything. There's no reason. They hire USIC, they do their locating. So if I have a question about the locates, call my USIC locator, So could you have something like that? Sure, But again, it's if nobody's looking at it and it's just sitting in a portal, well, what's the point? So.
There'd be some level of making sure that data went in there had integrity also, because what you talked about earlier, if you have bad information in, it's going to give you bad information out.
Correct.
So you'd have to be able to watch that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what advice would all of you give to a new excavator starting off in Texas, regarding A11 system and damage prevention and, locating, excavation, all that stuff?
My advice to them would be very clear. Know what you're doing, know your project, know what you're doing, and be as clear as you can with the words in your ticket, with the markings in the field, putting your phone number on there saying, my cell phone's on me 24 hours a day. You have a question, just call me. However you can clearly define that. And then when you get on site, to just have your head up. It's always hectic on the first day as an excavator. You get there, you got equipment moving in, you want to hit the ground running because, time is money, and too many times people aren't looking around and saying, like, that house has gas meters, there's no gas here. Like, there's no wires up on telephone poles, and there's no electric marked on the ground, and I see lights on in a house. So you got to kind of have that feeling, in the field, and just, like I said, be very aware that the utilities in the ground are dangerous to you as an excavator. So be very cautious around them and be very due diligent in making sure that you're putting your guys in the best position to succeed and be safe.
Yeah, and it seems like, to me, coming in from the outside, if you're coming in and just starting in Texas, talking to Texas 811, who's got a small army of damage prevention managers, and sitting down with one of them and getting the lay of the land, especially if you're only going to work in a smaller geographic area starting out, they could probably put you in touch with most of the locators that are working in that area so that they could start out day one with some face-to-face meetings and actual phone numbers. And it's not foolproof, but at least it starts out on the right foot communication-wise.
I think that from a manufacturer standpoint, whenever we go out and collect the voice of the customer, we're on the job site, so we're there and see a normal job site working. The other time we end up on a job site, if something's gone really bad, like there's some kind of a dig-in that's become an issue, and then we're having to get involved to some degree. And so the advice I would give, having seen some of those, is, when you're making a decision, there's always that little voice, that little gut that tells you, hey, maybe something's going on here. And if you hear that at all, or you see that at all, there's some kind of a cover, a manhole cover, or some kind of an indication that maybe something's there. Don't say, oh, well, it's just not marked, I'm going to go. Think about it, process through that, because trying to save time on, okay, well, I'm just going to chance it. A lot of times, if you can get but one time, and it takes up all that time you would have saved. And so, if you kind of have that voice in the back of your head, listen to it.
Yeah, I'd recommend that the excavator familiarize themselves with 251, Chapter 18. Call in what you need, right? Call in what you need that you can do in a shorter amount of time. Segment your work out. Don't call in a full scope. Call in work that you can complete within the window of the ticket. White line, stake it. anything that you would do if you had to go out and perform the locate, what would you want as the delineation on that job site? And understand that in doing so, the locate group can mark that job site and get onto the next job site and onto the next job site, which are gonna be their job sites versus calling in more than they can do in a certain amount of time. That way they can pick and choose what areas they wanna excavate in, but keep the entire area current. That's one of the biggest issues we run into with these larger scope jobs. Excavators call in way more than they can complete in a 30-day period, and then those updates come back in, and we're updating job sites that have not been excavated on, only to put a second round of paint on those, so that the excavator have options in that community or in that neighborhood. That limits us, right? That we're expending labor in areas where we shouldn't be, and it keeps us from getting to that next ticket on time. So that'd be my recommendation for those coming in.
And I don't know if this happens or not, but I hear this with some frequency that many times the people from the excavator calling in the locates aren't really the people out on the job site, which might lead to, well, they're just trying to get their job done and they have this big long list of locates, so they call them in not really understanding the ripples that's causing. And I'm sure somebody seasoned like you guys don't do that, but it sounds like I hear that often enough. It must be happening in some areas where it's somebody not familiar with excavation is actually calling in the tickets.
I mean, the only thing I would say to your point there is from the way we handle things is we call in well ahead of what we're doing. I mean, we do mostly utilities like water and sewer and storm sewer and stuff. So we're digging in a linear foot. We travel a far distance in a day. But we call in well ahead of what's going on for that particular reason. We want to know the marks are ahead of us. We can get our vac truck ahead to soft dig those lines so we know they're good. And if there's an issue, my crew's not sitting, because when it sits, I don't make money. And you know, we're all in it to make money. So it sounds like you're not seeing that side of it, and sometimes it's good, you know, we call in ahead of time, and it's, you know, then we can do those things like, hey, you know, there's gas meters on the house, there's no gas marks here, and that gives everybody some time to catch up. It also allows, you know, hey, you know, when the designer got the maps from the utility company, the water main was supposed to be over here. It's over here where we're supposed to be digging, so now, you know, there's all sorts of other things that need to go into motion to get a redesign or you know, to readjust the ticket to a new location on the other side of the road so that you can get your work done. So sometimes when we call those ahead of time and it seems like we're not getting to it, there is kind of a rhyme to that reason. Sure.
So along the same lines, what advice, if any, would you give to a new locator starting off in the Texas 811 damage prevention system?
Keep your hands inside the ride. Yeah, it's you know, it's a tough gig. I've been doing it. Will be 23 years this month. Started as a technician in the field, and the business has changed so much since I started. Right, we were, you know, everything was on paper. Prints were paper. Billing was paper. You know, if you had 20 tickets in queue, 18 of those were single address tickets, and you had 2 projects, and there was typically either road widening project or, you know, remediation of water or sewer lines and stuff. And so things have changed so much. You know, my advice to them would be, you know, give it the time that it's going to need for you guys to learn that position. And normally I say, you know, give it 12 months. You know, you'll see the seasonality of our business, which is not much here in Texas, but you know, you're going to deal with the elements, the heat we deal with here. We deal with the cold as well. Be patient, right, and communicate. You know, communication is part of the reason what we're talking about here, right? It's become more and more important, and you know, being able to go out and communicate with an excavator and hold up your end of the bargain, right? Do what you say, what you're going to do. It's a big piece, but I think be patient with yourself. There's a lot to learn. You're not going to learn all of it in 12 months, and frankly, you'll never learn everything there is to learn about the locating business. Dealing with abandoned facilities, as you mentioned earlier, and things like that. There's always something new to be learned there. be patient. That'd be my recommendation.
I would mirror a lot of what you just said. The communication's obviously key. Another thing I would tell them is don't guess. Don't guess. We see it a lot, especially with newer locators. They think it's here, but if you're going to guess, put a big old question mark next to it and call, and then pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I got a mark here. I think it's the electric line, but if you're going to dig in here, be very, very careful, because I'm not sure what's here, or and then to be thorough, just make sure that again, you're there from your position, you hold guys' lives at stake. You really do, and take it very seriously, because it would just take one foggy Monday morning to cost the family everything. So just take it very seriously.
Okay, any other thoughts for new employees, for any of the other stakeholders, whether it's the 811 call center or utilities, people at utilities in the damage prevention space? Any other thoughts or advice?
Yeah, the only thing I would throw out there is I think that everybody who works for a utility or facility owner, anybody in the process, everybody at that company needs to have the mindset that they're involved in damage prevention. Just because you're not a locator or not a foreman, hopefully you know enough about damage prevention and keeping people safe that you can speak up if you see something's not right, and respect the locators, because they don't get enough respect. And as you said, Steve, that's huge. I mean, if they're not doing their job, it's a huge problem. And so I think supporting everybody and just really realizing that everybody who works for the company is involved in damage prevention, create that culture, that mindset. And I think you have a small army of people out there making sure things are being done right.
I think all these guys have touched on it to some degree, but just, almost over communicate. So if you're newer and your communication's key, we've already said that multiple times here. So if you've got a question about whether you should communicate or something or not, communicate it. And then as you get more seasoned and more time, you'll understand what maybe should or shouldn't be. But it's always a better experience to say, hey, I over communicate a little bit this week, than I didn't say something and here's what happened.
Is part of, going back to the original question and regarding communication and beyond just phone calls and texts, is some of the reluctance, I guess, Steve, from your experience with it, is some of that change management, not just on your part, but on the part of the other stakeholders who you said are not using the system as much as they should? For example, I'll give an example. When a lot of these online orderings for restaurants, or pizza or takeout or all those things, or ATMs, when they came out, there were a lot of people who are like, no, I like calling in my orders, or I like talking to my bank teller face to face. And now I think most of society's at the point where they're like, no, I actually don't want to talk to anyone, right? I want to place it online. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to go into the bank. I want to go to an ATM. If I go into a bank, I'll have to show my ID in addition to my ATM card. So how much of that is change resistance that will catch on, and how much of it is some of the functionality that might need to be improved or added?
I mean, as there's the changing of the guard, let's say, between the older workers and the younger workers, the younger workers are definitely more apt to be jumping on technology. It's easier for them. They work faster, and it's the same thing when computers first came out. There were people that didn't want to work with Excel spreadsheets and things, and technology advances for a reason. It's helpful. It's useful. It's just everyone has to buy in. That's what ultimately it comes down to. If the technology is there, it needs to be saving everybody time. It can't just be saving some people time. It can't just be useful for an excavator, but it's costing the locator. He's getting a third of his work done a day because he's spending so much time jumping back and forth onto a portal or whatever. So it's got to be useful for everybody. Trying to create a system that's that fail-safe, again, when it's just another thing to check, another thing to look into. I just don't think you can beat the phone call situation. It's, you know, it's a little bit different. Again, you know, you don't want to deal with people, that's fine, but you're in a position and you're doing work where you have to. Sorry, it's part of your job. You know, I need to know, and I personally enjoy when a locator calls me and says, hey, Steve, just want you to know I was over on 2nd Street, got that locate done for you. Like, oh, thanks. You know, are you the guy in this area? Yeah, I am. Okay, I'm going to save your number. So then you know, and just being able to hash that stuff out, it takes 2 seconds versus taking 10 minutes. So I just don't know why you try and reinvent the wheel that way as far as, you know, creating other layers of communication, whereas just emphasize the fact that reach out and call somebody. Like, let me know who you are. You can know who I am. If I have a question or you have a question, it's a 2-second phone call. Let's just hash it out real quick and keep moving forward. It's, you know, it allows for a safer environment, which is ultimately what we're all here for. So if you can just hash that out quick and move on and then go on with the rest of your day's work, I don't know why you would try and reinvent that wheel more than just a phone call. You can't beat it, so.
I think the change thing too that I see is it is hard to get people to want to change, especially when you got multi-generations in there. And it seems like I've seen it be most successful when you're explaining all the way through the outcome of why this change is a good thing. And I think that seems obvious, but I don't think it gets done a lot of times. It's just like, here's the new way we're going to do things. And so then everybody just says, well, I don't want to change. That's more work. And if you take the time to show them how it actually isn't more work in the long run, probably have a better success rate anyway.
Well, he touched on it. They have to, you know, I think from what I can understand, you know, if they see value in the portal, then they're more likely to use it. And so it's almost unfortunate for new people coming in if they, you know, you may get 2 people have the same mindset and one of them has a good experience with the portal, and so they're like, oh yeah, we've got to use this, and another person has a bad experience. They're like, oh, I can't believe no one's going to use that. That's not useful. One thing as we've been talking, just from someone who doesn't work for a locating company or an actual contractor doing the business, it sounds like one of the challenges in locating, I've heard this over and over again, which is one of the reasons I'm bringing it up, is when you start the perception that, hey, contractors are calling in more work than can be done in a reasonable amount of time. And so my guys are going to end up having to go back out there and relocate because we knew they weren't going to be able to do that much work in time. Or they're waiting too late to call in a contract, or, okay, the locator isn't communicating back properly with the excavator. And it seems like that happens more on bigger jobs, or at least it's highlighted more on bigger jobs because there's so much at stake there. Is there any opportunity or any way to almost delineate between, okay, you've got guys who are going to do neighborhood calls and you've got guys who are going to do small jobs, and then you have guys who are going to do big jobs, and those big jobs are kind of tied to those jobs a little bit more so that communication becomes easier. I don't know if that's even anything that's been done or looked at before in the States.
I was actually going to touch on that. I think it's a combination of both, right? I think there's some jobs that can be communicated very cleanly and clearly through a portal type of situation. But the work that we're seeing today is gravitating more towards these larger jobs where that field contact is really more important. Where if we want to designate a certain workforce go to these tickets and a certain workforce go to these tickets, and we need to have a separation of what type of ticket are we talking about. Mm-hmm. And then you can attack that work a little differently from an operational perspective. We do some of that, specifically with a lot of what we consider fiber overbuild work. We have a lot of fiber going in the ground right now, and we are handling that differently than some of the other work. But you know, in my opinion, it's really kind of 2 different types of work. We've got the shorter scope work, which could probably be handled through the portal, and you know the job's done. And then you've got these longer scope tickets where these tickets are called in every 10 days consistently, right? And so that's kind of hand-to-hand combat, right? I mean, you've got to be out there with the project coordinator, whomever it is, saying, okay, we've marked this, where are you headed next? And it goes back to the scope of work that can be called in on a ticket in Texas, ultimately. You know, the amount of tickets that can be called in, the amount of jobs that don't have excavation on them, and then the lack of communication in some cases with excavators of just not having any contact with that individual. Now, for every one out there that does it right, there's probably 10 that are not doing it correctly. And so that leaves a lot up in the air for the locator to communicate back with, and it gets to where we're guessing what needs to be marked, when the reality is it's a small portion of what was called in.
And that's why, like, having that upfront meeting, if everybody commits to that, it works out real nice. Like, if you called me and you're like, hey, you just recalled in 4 tickets, like, where are you working? Because I don't have time to get all 4 done. So I'm going to do 2 of them. I'm going to do 2 of them today. I'm going to do 2 of them on Friday. Or, hey, are you going to be here by this date? Or is it cool if I leave that for next Monday when I'm back in town? Because there's a lot of times where we have those communication with a locator, and it's like, yeah, we're not. I called those in ahead of time. My soft dig truck still has 500 feet to go till it gets there. You got plenty of time, so no problem.
We're holding each other accountable, right? Because we don't do the correct thing on every job site, right? I understand that. So it holds both us and the excavator accountable. We agree upon the plan, and we get the plan done. And if for some reason we fail, we got a phone call right there. Hey, this is what I need. What happened, right? But again, it's that proactive communication that can really help avoid a lot of the issues that come up on these jobs.
And you tie that into that back-end communication too. You guys have a tough job because the maps you get sometimes, they're not accurate. The infrastructure in this country is not known where it is in many, many instances, way too many instances. So that ability to be able to have that back-end communication with, hey, the line's here, we found it here, we found it here, or we came out, the line's exposed. If somebody wants to come hit it with a GIS unit or something, so they know for the next time to update their maps. Like, ultimately, that saves you guys time. You're not sitting there scratching your head saying, the valve boxes are over there. The main's supposed to be over there, and then you obviously are spending an extra, great amount of time doing your due diligence to make sure that what you're putting on the ground is correct. So it doubles, triples the amount of time for that locate. So being able to have that back-end communication allows for these maps to get updated properly so people know where things are, and then it's a much easier locate for you guys in the future, or for your remarks or whatever. Because if you send Steve to go do the first one and I spend an hour trying to figure it out, and then the site gets torn up and a recall's called in, and somebody else is sent there, they got to spend the same hour doing it. So it's also that back-end communication where if we can get these maps a little more accurate, it helps everybody.
And we do have escalation processes with our clients to escalate that situation and get the print corrected and things like that. And then internally, we have some flexibility in our ticket management system to notate if within that geographic footprint that we had an issue or something like that, to your point. So internally, we can handle some of those changes, and then obviously we have escalation policies and procedures that go up to get the prints updated, things like that.
In Australia, the system's kind of opposite. The contractor is ultimately responsible for the locate, and basically they get sent maps. And so from everything I hear, the maps are more accurate because they've been doing this so long, and the contractor supposedly has a vested interest in the map being right, so they have a vested interest in letting the facility owner know that the map needs to be updated. So, it's kind of built into the system that way. It's in everybody's best interest, and we don't have that as much just because our system is different. So it takes more proactivity, but it seems like everything I hear, that's where everybody is pushing really hard right now, is get the maps good and get everything mapped. And unfortunately, we all know it's not going to happen quick. I just talked to a couple of guys on a plane last week who were told they were going to map, but they had to locate with GPS 63,000 miles of pipeline in their system in 18 months. Using contractors and in-house, but yeah, that's what everybody does when it's explained that way. Good concept, right? We all want it located at 18 months. Sure.
All right, thank you, Scott. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or? No questions? This is a very enlightening. Do any of you have any last comments or thoughts about this this topic about communications and new excavators in Texas? All right. Thank you, everyone. Can we get a hand for these fine panelists? Thank you for leading the first roundtable of the day, and we'll be back in a few minutes for those on the streaming.
The future of this industry is going to be completely different than it is today. I believe that this is one of the most exciting times to be a part of this industry because we're at the moment where this big breakthrough and change is about to happen. I really believe that. Technology is moving as fast as it is, and the culture is moving, and it's catching up with technology. 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a zero delay between when the excavator wants to dig and when they have the information that they need to dig safely. So the future of the industry is going to be around delivering accurate, precise information to the excavator in real time so that they can dig without damage.
The system's broken.
Sucks to be you, we already got all these customers.
But you are the problem.
It should be mandatory.
You never say never and you never say impossible.
when the system started off 35 years ago, waiting 2-3 days to get something, like locating done was probably okay, right? Now, when I could pick up my phone and get something delivered here within 2 hours by Amazon Prime Now, telling me I need to wait 2-3 days, and today's Wednesday, so in some places, 3 days means Monday. Right? Right. That's like when the dinosaurs roamed Earth. I mean, there's a huge disconnect. And if you work out the math, I'm just saying, let's say the average cost of a damage is $2,500, right, just financial cost. And if I just go ahead and dig, and I have 1 in 50 chance of damaging something, the expected value on that action is only $50, right? So if I wait, I might lose the $3,000 or $5,000, whatever contract, over $50.
I think there are some conscious decisions not to do it. Now, it's not on the responsible contractors. There are people still out there. I used to think that the days of it's cheaper to cut it were gone. Unfortunately, we have people that, go out, cut something, now they're out of business, now they pop up the next day in another business and they're at it. It's the same way on the locating side. So I think there are still some conscious decisions out there to do the wrong thing, whether it's the misperception that they're going to be quick and done and out, but I think that does happen some. I don't know educationally or advertising wise that there's much we can do there.
When we sometimes show people all the ways to look at the shape of the field, for example, people will say, I don't have time to do that. Well, whether you have time or not is immaterial. What we can assure you, and it's always nice to hear this back from a student that maybe originally said that, and then we'll come back and say, hey, you're right. The more you know, and the better you get at understanding how to look at a field from different vantage points, the more you can tell not only about the line that you're trying to locate, but you can tell about what kind of environment that line is in, where other conductors are, all at the same time while you're locating a single line. And I like to say is, look, if you take this, practice it, learn it, you'll actually be faster and way more accurate than you are right now saying that I don't have the time to do all this.
Right. So many things come to mind that I wouldn't have ever thought of 15 years ago. So yeah, to be able to assess the situation, think about it more simply rather than, hey, this is magic and I just have to accept it. There can be things that could be changed in the locate, but you have to realize it's not right in the first place.
It's not always the contractor's fault. But is it perceived that way? Absolutely. Because what do you see on the news? You see a house on fire, a neighborhood flooded, a building being destroyed, blown up. And they lead the story off with, construction company hits gas main, blows up building. So yeah, they all think we're reckless, but that's not how it really is.
It's not even just on the news. Take any standard neighborhood in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
The power goes out. There's a contractor. Automatically, all the residents say, "Oh, there's a contractor working out there. They must have hit something." Yeah, one of your foreman calls you, tell you they hit something. What's your first question?
Was it Mark?
Was it Mark?
So how far off?
Yeah.
Are we okay?
It's
whose fault?
Please tell me it's not us.
Right. And that's what getting together like this, we're trying to solve is it's trying to make it nobody's fault anymore. Get all the information on the table, where your pipe is, where your pipe is, where you were, where I was, and we all have that information and the locators trained properly so that we don't blow up a building or the laborer doesn't go home that day.
To the roundtable at the Texas 811 Damage Prevention Summit. My name is Jeremy Wang with BizMetrics. And can I have the panelists just quickly introduce yourself and your company? Let's start with Shane.
Yeah, my name's Shane Hart. I'm the CEO of Computers Inc. We make a couple damage prevention applications such as Utilicate and Excavate.
Tom Hall, I'm Vice President of Business Development for Cortera.
Dow Evans, Pipeview America Field Supervisor.
Craig Reed, National Sales Manager for Radio Detection.
All right, thank you. So the topic for this roundtable is, the question is, how does the industry leverage data and data analytics more versus simply increasing field headcount as excavation and 811 ticket volumes continue to increase? So can we have someone volunteer to kick that off, please?
Well, definitely, it's hard on the being kind of an expense side, right? Expense side of the accounting statements, that it's always trying to bring it down on the cost there and find ways to streamline that down, while at the same time, we have wages need increase and stuff like that out there. So there's never a solution of just adding more people to the process. And sometimes in software, like we're involved, if you do things and you automate and get a streamline at the beginning, the more you have kind of things happen out there, the faster and the more work can get done. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the software and the processes. And some of the analytics that come in there can be quite advanced. The stuff of pulling in, say, capital project planning from a city, so forth. And one of the hardest questions that we always have sometimes helping some of our locate service providers is, how long is that locate going to take? And you can't even get enough data to leverage across that to kind of choose. So I'm kind of curious, what do you guys use for analytics to kind of do some of those predictions on managing how much locates a guy can do in a day?
Well, I'll look at it from our company's perspective, is data can certainly be leveraged for a lot of things. And I think the question at hand here certainly is an interesting one. And I think you started down the line, right, Shane, as far as, I think the idea is one, the data can help you understand if staffing needs, if you will, in this particular narrow case. I know, for instance, our company is growing quite a bit. And so we're constantly looking at metrics, data, in order to justify, is there a higher need in certain departments? And, a lot of people do it by feel. Oh, it just feels like we're busy. We feels like we're overwhelmed, for instance. But yet, the data will really tell you, are you doing your job maybe less efficiently, so you don't necessarily need more bodies, or as opposed to, yep, the bandwidth needs to be increased based on the amount of work being increased. And the data really is telling some cases and will go against what your perception may be.
It's very interesting to add the conferences that we've been to, like, for example, like CGA. I've been with the company for coming up on 9 years, and just to kind of see how the industry has changed at CGA and the importance of data and how data is really driving everything. From our perspective, we view data as an opportunity for locate companies to get better, to be a little bit more efficient from a training perspective, right? So, adding headcount is not always necessarily the answer, right? If you're adding headcount, they don't necessarily have the tools that they need to be successful, then all you're doing is just compounding the issue. So from our perspective, what we're looking at doing is possibly taking that data, incorporating it into a system that allows the locator to be a lot more efficient and drive a damage prevention-free environment.
Interesting.
Along with that, I mean, we do a lot of our own locating with Pipeview. So the easiest thing for us is we still call in our 811s. We do all of that. And, a lot of times we're sitting there waiting. Well, then they'll come, we'll get our locates. And, you got two guys sometimes out there for a big job. And one guy's really telling the other, well, all right, you got to do this, you got to do that. So they're getting their training right there. And you've got to rely on this guy that's 200 feet away to make sure that this guy's doing it right. And I mean, we do the same thing in the camera industry as well. And so I think the big thing is, there definitely has to be the tools and the training there to really solidify the locates. I mean, that's huge for us, because I mean, we not only do we do inspections, but we do a lot of potholing as well. And so having that comfort level, we've got a couple of locators that we work with here in the Metroplex that are amazing. And I love seeing those guys when we get to a job. But, it's hit or miss, being all over the state, you never know what you're going to get.
Definitely on the public locate side, there's so many locates that there's never enough resources out there. That problem doesn't really go away. And like I said, there's pressures pushing on it down from each sides. And you hear a lot now with like AI and, hearing that artificial intelligence. And really that's a bit of a buzzword, because there's a lot of ways to generally, kind of generate business intelligence through your data and your analytics. For example, with some of the wands and stuff and doing the mapping as you locate, right? Ways that data can be used for future stuff is if you have your historical data that you're collecting that, and a guy's gone out to the field, say 3 times, and the first time there was maybe a map correction where he had to do some GPS collection. And now the second and third time that person or someone else is out there and they don't have to do map corrections because they verified the map, essentially you can use the dig areas, the notification areas, the locate areas, all those different, GIS data bits to really look and kind of predict almost like, is that a low risk one? Is that confidence? And you can use the data and analytics to help manage the confidence level of the locators so that when they get out there, they can know, like we've talked about some things with data, like even tracking the hookup points in your GIS data. So if I go out there, not all hookup points are the same. Some give a real good signal, some don't. And speeding up that time for that locator to be able to go out there and find out what was done last time to make sure a safe dig happens again. And you might have a new guy, and that can be, a big leverage to use for him to improve that process. And when he finds out, and that's just talking about mapping data, when we talk about historical data and looking at, you get all these dig sites. One of the other ones is looking at your damages, actually tracking the specific spots of your damages in there. And maybe that doesn't, help out the guys doing the public locates, but it might stop you from making the same damage twice, which if I'm a utility and you're the locate provider and you're doing the same thing, the same area you've done again, it shows you're not learning. It shows maybe you're not using your analytics to help predict some of those things.
Well, and that's the great points you bring up, Shane, because along those lines, you can use analytics, for instance, in especially now when you come to locating, to potentially help the locators understand how to most efficiently do their locates in the field. So to your point, if you're able to track risk is another buzzword in our industry, of course, right now, and just the overall priority of each ticket, right? They come in from from a one call center priority perspective, and now how do you prioritize that work, right? How do you do the riskiest stuff first and then so on in order to maximize your efficiency in the field? So again, there may be no need to increase personnel in the field if you're able to do your jobs more efficiently in the field. I think, especially now when we're going to feel the impact of the infrastructure bill that was passed and all the projects that are going to be happening, especially in areas where they just aren't used to this. It's going to stretch companies like yours. It's going to stretch, we'll all have a hand in that in one way or another. And this is where really, I think, in my mind, data really needs to be leveraged in how to best see things coming and then how to best deploy, for instance, personnel in the field. And do we actually need additional personnel?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you think about it from a locator company revenue standpoint, that data is actually there to allow you to assess whether or not from a revenue standpoint you're charging the amount that you should be charging, right? Because there could be a specific situation where you're out locating a specific asset and it's a challenge. It's a little bit more of a challenge. So having that data allows you to go to your customer and say, hey, I know that you want this done correctly. I know that you want this done accurately. In order for us to do so, here's why we need to do.
It's good to have that data to look at that cost and stuff, because sometimes, a utility wouldn't hesitate to put the liability on yourself as an LSP and say, hey, it's okay. If you don't know the risk, that's a benefit to us.
Right.
And sometimes there's a big difference between chasing zero damages or minimizing the cost of your damages. They're not exactly the same thing, right?
So if I see 100 people using an axe to chop down trees, and I walk up with the chainsaw, I'm going to be a very popular guy. But it seems like in this industry, we have a lot of possible, and you guys alluded to this, we have a lot of technologies available, but the adoption seems to be slow. And the people are happy using their axes. Do you sense that? If you do, what do you think the barriers are? What can or should we do to accelerate the adoptions of those technologies, where maybe to Shane's point, they're seen less as an expense, but as something that have very high ROI, right? It's the chainsaw. What are your thoughts on that?
Like anything that ROI is, it's hard to see the value of it now, right? And so companies look at these things with the ROI, and you'll see utilities, they'll act differently if they've had a recent damage that costs them a lot of money. Like a municipality might act differently than a gas company. It's probably hard to see a gas company that doesn't have some sort of management software with some of the regulatory associations that are out there to keep them in check. And that doesn't always apply for it. And this industry is very interesting because people don't understand how much data is in this locate data. You have GIS systems, and when we talk about GIS system, that's just regular data with a coordinate and a place on a map somewhere. And there's so much data, so much moving parts, that not only is the adoption hard, but some people are overwhelmed by how many different things there are. We have changes of softwares at the call center that happen, annually sometimes, and there's just so many moving parts that sometimes people are scared. And I find it's the damages that really generate them to say, hey, time for me to get a chainsaw.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question that is posed, because it's truly, I think, like you were saying, Shane, sometimes the expense-driven excuse, and certainly there's a very reactive part of our industry, but it's the, I think, inconsistencies within our industry that sometimes lend to that as well, because there isn't a consistent level, for instance, across the board that everyone has to meet from a metric standpoint. To your point, your gas utilities, your pipelines and things are going to look at things way differently than a telecom or a telco will in this industry. And when it all should be looked at in the same way. And so with that, then the expenses are also looked at in the same way. And then you have just regular economics that drive things. Like, I can't remember the last time I haven't heard, I've been told to drive down costs. I've been told to drive down costs, cut costs. And to your point, all of a sudden you could have something because of that reduction happen, a negative consequence in the field that results in much more than you're trying to save on your bottom line sheet at the end of the day. And again, I think data can show this, because I just don't think intellectually people understand the ROI of these investments sometimes. I just don't think that it's top of mind and it's right in front of their face in order to really take it seriously or understand what it means.
Well, I mean, with that though, it changes, every time something changes, a new update comes out or anything else, you've got that learning curve of figuring out, okay, I've got 3 people testing this change out, trying to make sure that it's going to work for everybody. And is that test group that you set up to do that the right test group? Or are they going to stumble and then not be able to explain, hey, this is where I stumbled, this is what we did to try and work through it? And change is scary. I don't care how bendable you think you are, change is scary. And in this industry, you start changing up a lot of things and your field team starts to see it and they're looking at it, I don't know what that is now. And so you've got to, with everything, you've got to weigh that as well. It's not, cost isn't always everything. It's a big part of it, but you got to look at your demographic that you're trying to get to use the equipment as well.
Yeah, to your point, it's the fear of the unknown. When you have technicians that have been using equipment and have been doing things a certain way, that's the way that they want to do it. That's how they're very comfortable with it. And when you start talking about implementing data and bringing data in, and then red flags start going off. Okay, wait a minute, are you tracking me? What's going on? Are you trying to find out what am I doing, and so on and so forth. So I think from a top-down approach, if the data if the data portion is presented from a top-down approach to the technician, say, hey, no, this is actually here for you to do your job better, to make you more efficient. It's pretty much going to be pretty better received.
When we talk about the change, right? I mean, I've been in this industry for almost 10 years now, and just in my time, like GPS has been around since the 70s, and it's starting to get more and more, and we look at how fast something's moved in 10 years, and we forget that some people are in the field, for 30 plus years that they've been locating and so forth. So sometimes we talk about the change and you quantify it, there's a lot of change in 10 years, and there's people, just like in a lot of industries, especially in the utilities and municipalities, we got legacy issues. Yeah. There is major legacy issues. Sometimes it's not as easy to bring that thing. I mean, we probably still got people on Windows 7 out there at the odd time, right? And those problems, they scale dramatically if you're in those things, because now, hey, paying for your own support of Windows 7 is going to force you to make those changes. And I always used to talk at some of these conferences just generally about adopting technologies and how to have your mindset right, how to test things out and try it out first in parallel environments, and some of the fundamentals about software and how to manage some of those changes and reduce the scariness and so forth. So I think that's very key to, again, getting those chainsaws out there.
Well, and I think that helps. Now, circling back, collect that data that will drive action and give visibility to answer the question that, again, we're discussing today, which is, is it a situation where I need more personnel in the field, or is it a situation where we just need to do things differently? Unless you're collecting the data. And sometimes if these tools aren't in place in order to do that, that becomes dark to you, it becomes gray to you, maybe fuzzy as an organization. And so you really don't have anything to act upon. So I think unless you make a concerted effort as an organization to say, okay, we really want to apply ourselves and look and collect the data around, in this case, these staffing issues, these personnel issues, how best to deploy personnel, how best to plan, well, we better be able to get the information, allow us to make that decision intelligently, which may require an investment in order to do that. Or also, it could be a combination of that, as well as leveraging tools that may already exist that you're not utilizing in the fullest way, potentially. But at the end of the day, you need that data in order to act upon it. And not only can you make personnel decisions with it, again, you can make other organizational decisions that may have tangential appeal to that personnel.
Sure. Yep.
So the training is one of them.
Yeah.
You're right.
So let me ask this. We have representatives from 2 software companies there. I know RD also has some software, but these are like pure software companies. Can the software companies do a better job of communicating the ROI? What I mean is, when you go into a client, potential client, do you go in right now and say, instead of selling the benefits and features, maybe just say, here's a sheet that shows you the ROI? Do you guys do that right now, or can you do a better job? Is that appropriate?
Well, of course we do that right now, you know. We go in there, we got the big sheet, the spiel, and your PowerPoint presentation or whatever, and live, and some of those things in there about showing that, it's always a convincing game to show that case, right? And there's different metrics that you have to show that, and again, someone might be at the ground level, be like, we need this, and I'm all on board, and then they take it up above, and they have a hard time regurgitating those ROIs to the next level person to get the approval or the budget allocation, right? So sometimes that can be a challenge, but we definitely go in and do that stuff and show that.
It certainly is. One of the things we made a concerted effort to do a couple of years ago was really kind of refine how we did that, because again, to the point you were making, Shane, is a lot of times it would get lost in translation at times. And so we ended up putting ourselves in the position of actually building out the material and specific to the organization, using metrics that they've verified, and then also trying to walk in line with their champions as experts internally in order to show what the actual return, if you will, on the investment or the enhanced investment in some cases, because like you had mentioned, Shane, a lot of these companies already have systems in place in certain cases. It's just a matter of enhancing that system or bringing in a different system that might be able to have different capabilities. I will say that there's a lot of times you can put in what you would consider the A+ business case, no problem. And sometimes, there are people that make decisions because there's change management issues internally sometimes that will take effect that will prevent an organization from maybe moving when they should. Typically, though, I see organizations, again, will react and end up going down a path that they may have been considering if they made maybe a short time.
I always find too that whether it's municipalities or utilities, there's not many that are exactly the same as that other one. So when you go in there, there's about assessing that, but really it's a business analyst skill. Absolutely. About sometimes it's hard to train staff below you to go in and cut out those things that are valuable to that, because the ROI has got a lot of items on it. And how do I show them the one that they really care about? Another point I wanted to bring up was about damages, and we have the dirt reports and we have all the analytics, and those are some things that we share, and if they generally get a damage in there, but even the damage in there is very underreported, right? And as we see that become more of a thing for people, it might drive some more movement there as well.
Yeah, and I would say, we're kind of at the embryonic stages from a software perspective, but what we've learned is that when we identify certain pain points and issues that certain customers that have had, we feel great about our equipment. Everybody feels great about their product, but how can that product specifically help those specific pain points and drive those costs out of the business? And once we can identify those and we can associate our product with that, then that's when we get the buy-in from the data.
Well, now is an excellent, going back to an item I brought up earlier, now is an excellent time to do a return on investment case or get companies to consider, because of the fact people are looking to reduce costs at all levels. Well, you can actually make an investment and at the same time reduce your costs. So if you can show that it will help the organization in the short and long term better position themselves from a cost standpoint, then certainly that's something that you can get them to maybe consider more in this day and age as opposed to maybe a few years back. And again, what are you going to use to do that? You're going to use data.
Yeah.
You're going to use data that, again, is not only sometimes generally specific to the industry, but more importantly, I think as you were touching on there, Shane, is using their own data that maybe they've never looked at in the way that you're presenting it to them.
That's right. And we talk about software, and the software is in everything nowadays, right? From the wand to the GPS, and everything's got a software component. And we talk, most people have a ticket management system to help kind of get their base level. And now there's a lot of different directions you can take there to keep improving the locate damage process. So looking at those analytics, like even the wand, the wand detection on the swinging, data exists out there. It's about how we capture it, so forth. So most of them get in there, but now it's guiding them on the next thing. I mean, we see AI stuff from satellite imagery, but it's only like 1 year that we get satellite imagery, so forth. And these things are going to continuously change. But some things are not ready yet, and it's not easy for someone that's there in charge of damage prevention for a utility to see through all this stuff, because it takes a lot of work and a lot of research on the different applications, the different innovations, and which one is right for them.
Right.
You know.
Okay, so great discussion. What are the costs and benefits of more data sharing or selling between stakeholders? I mean, I think it was Shane who said this industry has so much data, sometimes the stakeholders don't understand how much data it has. So what are the costs and benefits of sharing some of that data or a lot of that data and reaching even greater critical mass?
Well, I'd like to say, sharing that data from team to team is it's going to allow others to be able to understand and rely on what you have sitting out there that they may have found for you or something along those lines, because we've ran across sewers that cities didn't know that they had that are still active. Oh, that line's been dead since 1980. Well, sorry, buddy, it's not. You always run into situations where you find something that's another way to find it, and companies like us are there to help. I mean, that's what we do. Yeah.
And from companies like yours, I was glad you chimed in right away, Dow, because companies like yours could always use more data, right? And the idea of concept of sharing data, those of us that have been in the industry for a long time know that that's a continued question, right? What data to share, how much data? There's certainly some sensitive data that might, people might be hesitant to share, but at the same time, there's ways to do it better than it's currently being done right now. And that could not only lead to help someone doing their job better, which helps an outcome, a better outcome in the field, but it also can help, again, better the overall process, right? So if you're not looking at the overall process and all aspects of the process, and again, that's one of the things I think that this industry does a pretty good job of, at least the associations around it, trying to get the different factions together to do that. But I think, there has to be more proactivity in that. And again, I think a lot of that has to do also with investments that, for instance, utilities are making in their internal applications like GIS. Right?
When you think about it, there's almost 30 stakeholders in this industry, right? Sometimes it's hard enough to get 2 people to share things across, and you want to make things open up. And, there's a few examples. One of the things that we've pushed for recently is when you get the GIS information from, say, a company that you're doing the locates for, and they want to push you monthly updates, right? But they're filling that map out in that time. So one of the things of sharing that data is using like a REST API, which is an application programming interface, and it just means real time. It means like you're making changes in your maps, I want those changes. And at the same time, I don't want to have to send you the updates to an FTP or something where someone manually goes and pushes it out to an FTP server. Those things are slow, right? And if we look at the cost versus the benefit of it, the benefit is great. A reduction of damages, more real-time information, and the cost might be you might have to change up a few licenses on your Esri accounts. And it's not really so much that maybe the cost is more than the benefit or vice versa. It's just a shifting of it sometimes. And you got to look at doing a full cost benefit analysis, to be able to understand if this decision is worth your time to do, right? Another example, like we're talking about inside of a company as well, right? And it's almost like a gamification. Sometimes sharing data amongst your peers, a popular term is gamification when you have software. So I want to know, how many did Joe do today? How many did Dave do today? And it's like, well, I'm better than Dave. And so if you share that data and you make those environments, right, you create competitive environments, and that's really how you're going to generate some of the behavior and really get some of the benefits with some of the costs you're implementing there.
Yeah, I'd say, with the IIJA project coming out, the benefit of sharing data is going to be very crucial, right? Because there are going to be so many things that are going in the ground that have never gone before, and it's just different projects that will be worked on that, we have no idea what's going on. We look at it and see what's getting assigned by state and so on and so forth. So the benefit of us sharing data can only help. I think you mentioned it earlier from a damage prevention standpoint and just driving those zero costs.
Well, on the calls, I was going to say on the call center side, another example is that, these call centers a lot of times are, nonprofits, example, or like a service. So they're not.
A lot of times they're all nonprofits.
That's right. And they're not really software engineers that can help drive the innovation, but they are a very crucial point that everyone has to kind of connect through. So when we find sometimes we'll duplicate responses. So we send it to the call center as well. We send the excavator a text message as well, or a direct robotic phone call or something, because they might not put their email on there. And the more notifications, information that goes around out there gets everyone on the same page. It's a little bit of a different action for someone to go log into something and check something, or for something to just go off on their phone and tell them.
Just appear. Right?
Tell them that's here. And what you're going to see with the call centers, and what we would like to see is more APIs, where if I'm collecting map data, let me update my service areas in real time if new stuff's going in. And that's just about the free flow of that. And we really need those call centers to be the drivers of that stuff. And sometimes, in the profiteering side of it, and they get a new software out there, that relationship is not super driven. It's very price kind of thing. So you see kind of a bit of a staleness to the innovation there sometimes.
So if sharing data is so great, why isn't it done more? It sounds like, some of you guys threw out some of the reasons, but is it because there's not enough financial incentive to do it? And what needs to happen for data to be shared more in this industry?
Well, I think it depends on the data you're talking about, but there's a couple of high-level things I've at least seen in my time that will prevent. One is an expense, potentially. The other is proprietary information, right? Competitive information. The other is legal reasons, and the other is security reasons. Those are the biggest categories I see. And there's some validity, I think, depending on what data you're talking about, but I think there's always workarounds to certain situations. For instance, you've been talking about GIS, Shane. GIS is incorporated in our software in certain cases for clients that use the software. And there, at times, initial hesitation because they hesitate about maybe sharing that data to an application like ours. When, and this is somewhat of a joke, but I will remind people, well, okay, that's fine. You may not want to show me where your stuff is, but I'll call 811 and you'll actually come out and show me where that is, won't you? So, I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. Right. There's ways to share it to where if someone, for instance, opened our application, saw a map, saw clients' data, and all they were looking at was a map, they would have no idea what they're looking at, right? I mean, and so I think there's sometimes, immediate maybe questions or reasons people think that they may not need to share the data, and oftentimes I don't think the thought process goes beyond that, unfortunately.
Well, even with the GIS, like it used to be, hey, I'll send it over to you, and then you get it on a laptop, and then they don't know what laptop that exists on anymore. So whether they think they're secure, there's a laptop out there, someone has it, and someone might have left it somewhere, or had his truck robbed or something, and it's out there. And with some of these new technologies come this stuff. So with the REST APIs, you get authorization tokens that are way more secure than you to hand some things off. So sometimes looking at, because that's as more sharing comes out, the security and people utilizing that for other things. And I think sometimes there's more scare to it. Like I do think there's more benefit to reducing damages than someone actually using that to do something. I mean, they could get that public information anyways. But like you were saying, when it comes to say my rates and my customer names and their phone numbers, no one's seeing that, right?
That's certainly information at least that should never come into play in what we're talking about from a damage prevention perspective, for sure.
So, Tom, you mentioned, several of you mentioned the security question, right? But I think most of us know the National Pipeline, NPMS, publishes a national map that's readily available to anyone of all the pipelines in the US. It's at their website. Shell Pipeline now has a Shell Pipeline Finder app that you can use on your phone. So isn't this pushback of security, I mean, aren't we past that? I mean, because if someone wants to do damage, can go to the internet, look up the National Pipeline Management System or Shell Pipeline and find these, very dangerous, not the cable run to my house, but very dangerous assets, and to cause harm, they could do it. right? I mean, how long will it take us, the industry, to get past that reason?
That's a good question. You know, I think all industries, a lot of industry in this country, beyond ours even, have gotten way more sensitive to litigation for one reason or another. But I think, you know, I think the points like what you're making, Jimmy, and it's similar to what the point I made is, if you have discussions, if you use data potentially to show people that the risk isn't as low. Plus, I know that there's now certifications that companies will trust between organizations. For instance, like a SOC 2, if you're SOC 2 certified or audited, you know, from a security standpoint, that's a really comforting thing to a lot of organizations, or ISO certification, or things along those lines. So I think there's ways organizations can ensure that the security practices, at least they take, are serious and documented and audited, et cetera. And I think a lot of times even those types of steps can bring the barriers down to even have conversations that will allow for the, you know, information exchange that might make people realize that what they thought initially might be a high security concern may be less than what they thought.
And you'll find, like, it's nice to hear things like Michelle and them, you know, doing that, because they're leaders in the industry for those things. And a lot of times it takes time for the word to get out that these companies are not afraid to do these things, and that people will start to follow suit. And we know nothing happens overnight, and so it'll take time to get in that. Another thing sometimes I see with some big cities, they'll start to share their capital planning, and they might share 1 year's worth of projects so that people can see what's going on in there. And there's lots of GIS applications that tie all those things in together. But then they'll keep 5 years in-house, and they'll have that there, and they won't share that part. So there's a line sometimes between, is it good data that we're sharing sometimes, and when is too much? And you'll find those lines are going to be shifting on where you get that data. But that's great to hear those places, because you'll have a small town guy that still wants to do it on paper because he doesn't want anyone to know where his mains are. And then next thing you know, he don't know where his mains are either.
Well, he retires. And
That's right. That's right.
Exactly.
I was gonna, you know, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say it's really the fear of the unknown. You know, what are you gonna do with that data? You know, now you have access to my data. What's gonna happen with it? What is the plan for it? And I think the more time that goes by, where people are starting to get a little bit more comfortable with what's being, you know, what's being shared and so on and so forth, I think a lot of the concerns will go away.
Yeah, and that's just specifically GIS data, right, that we're talking about, where things are. Sometimes there's other data, you know, just sharing, sometimes locate data across locate companies, and sometimes they're working together for the same utility company, and the utilities are starting to create competitive environments across their locate companies, and they have kind of a single access point. And so even if it's gamification for one company, the utilities are starting to do this at a different scale for others. So it's very interesting to kind of watch and see how people behave.
Yeah,
agreed. About that.
I mean, the big thing with that, you know, the gamification is, I mean, we do a lot of work for Atmos Energy, and they have a lot of camera contractors. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's one team, one fight. You know, if we've got another contractor here in the area that needs some help, we're quick to go help out. You know, and at some point, we're all here to make money and grow and do bigger and better things. But at some point, you have to step back and look at your client's interest as well. And if I can help our client by helping these people, then, you know, it kind of, there's competition there, but it takes some of that out, because in game is make sure the client's happy.
And that's like, you know, me and Tom are ticket management companies, right? And so we're direct competitors, but at the end of the day, we're still working towards zero damages. I mean, I kind of like working in the industry that, you know, it does have a little bit of difference. You know, it kind of goes quiet, which is quiet is always good. And then you hear, you know, of some real bad damage or something like that, and it breaks everyone's heart kind of thing. And it realizes, hey, that we're all in this together to work towards those same goals. And, you know, sometimes it'd be good to get a CEO out there and try to locate sometimes, so that they could get a different perspective on some things too. And then they might share a little bit more and so forth. But that's great to hear that stuff.
So what are, in terms of the data sharing, right, there are obviously some costs and benefits. Is more data sharing from your perspective a net desirable or undesirable or unknown at this point? And how much of the trepidation of some stakeholders is how do you say it, like fear of the unknown and change resistance, if you will, versus like actual technical barriers or other barriers like that?
I don't think the technical barriers are there. I think it's more just a trepidation. You know, it's like if you have an Apple phone or an Android phone in Europe right now, they just passed where the Apple phone must use USB-C. So that's definitely something that reduces the costs of it, right? But increases the sharing of, hey, that charger you have now is vice versa. So the technology is there for these companies to do that. And it's really comes down to economic reasons and business reasons about making them available. And sometimes there is some competitive aspects where some people might limit some things just to keep a competitive advantage sometimes.
Agreed, because I think if anything, it's easier to share data now than ever, right? Because most applications like ours are made to have open access, if you will, to publish and and share data, if you will. And most organizations have the ability to intake that data because they've moved their data management or storage and/or into the cloud, which offer those tools. So, and the security in exchanging that, similar to what we were talking about, how you're exchanging the mapping information. So I think the incentives are certainly there. It certainly has reduced the costs as well. So again, now is a very good time. And I do actually, at least in my point of view, see that a lot more people are from us at least, wanting more data. And which is a good thing in many, many different ways. Because again, at the end of the day, from a damage prevention lens of this, if you're looking at your data more effectively, then hopefully that's leading to positive outcomes in the field.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions from the audience members here? No questions. So here's a question. We talk a lot about cost savings and stuff, and we're working our way towards zero damages, but for most of the stakeholders in this industry, their labor costs are frankly significantly higher than their damage costs, right? And that's true for locators, even utilities and excavators. Do they see additional use of data analytics, or data sharing as ways that they can use to reduce that even bigger bucket of expenses like labor? Or do those of you in the software industry and maybe even hardware industry communicate that to them? How do they receive that?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we view the data as an opportunity for the contract locate companies. I think I kind of alluded to this earlier. Contract locate companies, other contractors as well, to be used as a way to increase revenue, right? So you have, to your point, there is a labor cost that is associated that goes with each and every locate, but being able to take the data and use that data and send it to a company and say, hey, this is the reason why our costs are what they are. We're driving zero damages. We are striving for damage prevention, allows you to justify that cost to that company.
I think that's a great point, because again, that's similar to justifying, do you need new personnel or not? It's the same thing from a locate company, in this case perspective in your example, is do they want the quality? Here's why you're going to get the quality. Here's the data, and here's why, based on that data, what it's going to cost. And I think that's how you leverage data for better outcomes, right? Because again, you get what you pay for. So that's a great example.
I know sometimes just hiring more bodies doesn't always mean something. You hire 20 more bodies and they don't even know what a locate is, and you have them for 3 months, and that just took all your time, right, to be able there to be trying training them. So definitely throwing more bodies. And there's lots of cool things that the software and technologies can do. For example, a lot of people reschedule some tickets, right? And they try to coordinate. But if you get into routing and you know that one ticket that's way off of your route and you reschedule that one, that's going to make your day way more clustered and more efficient, right? So definitely using the different things to speed up that. And even with the GIS, when we talk about triaging tickets and putting them to a high-risk profile, it might be a reality that you're not, there's some cases, I'm sure some locators look at their board and there's no way I'm doing all this in 2 days. And then sometimes you have to know which ones are more are more meaningful to do, and you try to reach out as much as possible. But on that triaging and checking the GIS information, you can know if it's high profile versus leaving it up to the locator to decide when he goes out there. If you can kind of, popular on technologies of the terms tags and categories like WordPress, but tagging tickets, and it's just a way of putting many different tags to one ticket, and there can be lots of reasons. And as we get into AI and all this stuff, the more that you can generate information before the locator even looks at it, and can help to really reduce the amount of his cost per locate, really, that he's putting in the more meaningful ones.
Yeah, that goes to the prioritization of the work, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, not only that, I mean, you're going to be more efficient in every locate that you get at that point because you have all the tools there at your disposal already. Your training's there, everything's already there, and now you have the data to help you be more efficient on the boots on the ground. And I mean, efficiency is everything. That's going to drive labor costs down. It's going to make you more profitable. I mean, everything. So
Well, even to deploying your best locators to the riskiest stuff, the hardest stuff, et cetera. So again, it helps not only in the speed of the work in the field potentially, but the outcome of that work as well.
I find sometimes they add more to the process too. It's like, okay, well now we got to track this one thing when you're out there too. So now you have another sheet or something, and you take this and scan it and put it on the ticket and so forth. And even thinking of every little click or every little step or touch of the pad, streamlining that down, right? It really makes a big difference. If you're doing a lot of locates and you're saving clicks or even cursor mileage, you got to drag over there to do that thing. And it's really, you want more time for the guys to do locates, period. And that's what the analytics can do. Some things too is, you might have some companies where they have, 30 people in the field and 30 in the office. And, if those office people could do some locates too, because a lot of that triaging and those tickets, kind of routing them where they are, you can draw areas on maps now and have those go right down to the locators, because the quicker you can get those locates into the hands of a locator, the less likely he is to drive past a locate that he could have just done right now, right? So using the analytics to really condense this stuff is powerful stuff, and there's a lot out there, and not everyone uses it to that extent, for sure.
And on that note, can we get applause for the roundtable here providing us? Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. This is the last roundtable of the day. We continue tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Central Time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.